So let's go on to our second sessions for this webinar today. So the moderator for our second session is Prof. No Azura, who is the head of Department of the Obstetric and Gynecology, Departments of the Faculty of Medicine, UKM. Her subspecialty is in pediatric adolescent gynecology. And now it's my pleasure to introduce to you the speaker for the second sessions, Prof. Sonia Grover. Prof. Sonia is a director of the Department of Pediatric and Adolescent Gynecology, Royal Children's Hospital, Melbourne. She's the consultant gynecologist of Royal Hobart Hospital, Tasmania. She's the consultant gynecologist of Canberra Hospital, Australia. She has over 100 publications in peer-reviewed journals and with an H index of 36 and a total citations of over almost 4,000. Her current research projects are genes of premature ovarian insufficiency, vaginal agenesis, disorder of sex development, and microbiome of adolescent genetic tract. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Prof. Sonia to deliver her talk on measuring the intangible, the connections between knowledge, ideas, communications, and courage.
Assalamualaikum, Prof. Tan. Can you just say a few words about Sonia? Assalamualaikum and a very good morning to everyone. It's actually a great pleasure for me to introduce to you my guru, to all of you this morning. She's not only my Sifu, but also a great teacher and mentor to many other PhD consultants worldwide. Sonia is actually the pioneer for the PhD subspecialty in Australia, and today she has trained many in this field, including myself and also Amelia. Sonia, she has published, as Prof. Tan said, in numerous papers and have been invited as speakers and expert panels at many international meetings. She's been involved in research projects with grants over more than 4 million, and recently she was awarded a 2 million grant to look at adolescent and period pain. And I guess without further ado, I'd like to invite Prof. Sonia to deliver her talk this morning, measuring the intangible, the connection between knowledge, ideas, communication, and courage. Please welcome Prof. Sonia.
First of all, thank you, Terima kasih, for your wonderful introduction, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you all here today. I feel very honoured to have been appointed as in this position and to be asked to give this talk of measuring the intangible. But I will have you note already on my front slide that your logo is there as well, inspiring futures and nurturing possibilities. So it's already been mentioned that there's a ranking system, and some of today's discussion is really all about what can you be doing to improve and make yourself a better university. So the ranking system with the QS system puts you in the top 200, and if we look at just Asia, 41. But your question is, where do you go from here? How can you do better than you're doing at the moment? So I think the question of what do ranking systems actually measure has already been raised by Prof. Emad. So how do they measure the system, and who is it, and who's doing the judging, and what are the criteria? And you could see that there were differences in criteria between the different systems. But one of the other things that you and I have to ask ourselves is, are they using criteria that matter? And actually, are they reliable at what they're measuring? You know, we look for evidence behind our decision making. So ranking systems are not always what they think they are. We only need to look at Iceland, where the average Icelander person was considered in the best financial categories, and Iceland had a AAA rating. That was given only weeks before the global financial crisis, at which time 85% of Iceland's banks went bankrupt. So rating agencies aren't infallible, so they don't necessarily tell you what you want to know or need to know. And we know that this wonderful fable of the tortoise and the hare, that maybe the fastest isn't the best, and maybe the tortoise is going to get there by taking a careful path. So this is the image and logo that one of the rating system uses, which I suspect it's an image that's been borrowed from one of the best ever movies that's been made, and on various rating systems, The Lion King does very well. So this has already been covered by Professor Emad, so I won't go into it, but it's just talking about two of the ranking systems. And again, just looking at where does UKM sit? Well, let's look at the top universities as ranked by QS. And you can see that many of them are in the States and the UK, with those numbers there. But you can see that when you compare the Times ranking system and the QS, that you've got some top 10 who don't rank in the top 10 when you look at the other system, and you can see that you can go from a top position to a fourth position, or vice versa. So what are we measuring, and is this what we want or need to be measuring? Because if we're going to aim for better, then we need to know what we're trying to measure. Now, that very reputable source of information, Wikipedia would tell us that these ranking systems will use the easiest available quantifiable characteristics. And you and I know that if we just use multi-choice papers, that may not be the best way of assessing the students. So using easy systems is not necessarily the best. And certainly the criteria are the ones that, again, Professor Emad has talked about. Let's look for a moment at a place like Harvard University, which is highly ranked, but 43% of their white students are actually admitted to Harvard because they're on an athletic scholarship, or they're the staff of, they're the children of staff or donors, or the University of Pennsylvania, where it seems that there's some people were admitted only after a pledge of $1.4 million. So some questionable things that lie behind some of those ranking systems. And the usefulness of that ranking has obviously been extensively debated, with questions about accuracy, and also that universities might end up spending too much time worrying about their ranking, and they get tangled in maybe playing with how you appear to others by encouraging staff to cite each other or support each other in surveys. So UNESCO has actually questioned when the ranking does more harm than good. And whilst acknowledging that, you know, they are perceived as a measure of quality, they do create this intense competition between universities. So there we've got a ranking system which might be okay, but might have problems. So are there any other criteria and things that we think are important that should also be measured? So what about, and again, Professor Emad has mentioned this, that where we sit in our society and what we contribute to our society, is that something that we actually want to aim for? And my sense is that that's important. But let's just stop for a moment. We are in the midst of COVID, and the dark coloured areas are the countries that have not done particularly well. Now, some of that can be attributed to being from less developed countries, but if we look at some well-developed countries, and we're looking at the UK and Europe and North America, we can see that those societies have not done particularly well. And yet, if we remember and recall the university ranking systems, the universities haven't succeeded in having a large impact on their society because their society has suffered with COVID. Now, maybe that's a biased view. I live with an infectious diseases doctor and I probably have got a distorted view, but it is one way of saying that maybe the ranking system hasn't reflected the impact that these universities are having on their communities and their society. So if we do think that they should be contributing, that we should be contributing to our society, we should also be offering ourselves as places of learning and the exchange of idea. So if we take a historical perspective for a moment, the university that's in Morocco is one of the oldest operating institutions in the world. Now, it was not named a university, but it has been a seat of learning for a long, long time. So it did call itself a university more recently, but I think in terms of its tradition as a Muslim centre, Islamic centre of learning, there is an origin there to say that in Malaysia you do have origins of teaching and learning going back an awfully long way. Now, if we can add to that the European sense of what's the oldest university. Well, it was established in 1088 and it was the Bologna University, and it's been a centre of continuous learning since then, with the definition of university being a community of teachers and scholars. There's a lot of argument and discussion about whether the Islamic centres reflect universities, and there's no doubt that there's been issues about whether academic freedom has been the same in both places. But in fact, when people have compared Islamic madrasas to the universities, there's a lot of features that are very common that walk through both. So you do have origins of teaching that go back a long way. And I think you need to remember that you have got that ground behind you. I must say, I asked myself, who am I? Who am I to lecture you? I don't feel like I have done all the things that Professor Emad has done to claim this special place. So sure, I entered medical school. I probably wouldn't have gone to medical school except that I was in that window when it was free. I enjoyed obstetrics and gynae and ended up sidetracking down there. I stumbled into paediatric and adolescent gynecology when the professor was away on a sabbatical. And I learned everything I know about, all I started to know about paediatric and adolescent gynae was by listening to my patients, and they were very much my teachers. And they were my inspiration because there were so many issues that I was seeing which clearly had not been thought about from a women's health perspective. But when I was working in the Children's Hospital, I was also in a very fortunate position where I was working with a whole range of clinicians. In Australia, many of the women's hospitals are silos, and you don't get the cross-fertilisation of ideas from other specialties. So coming into the Children's Hospital meant that I got exposure to things that I had not been exposed to before. And it meant that things like anaphylaxis occurring with periods, which is not something that gynecologists are usually taught, but because I was in a children's hospital where that diversity of exposure occurred, that I gained a lot of knowledge. I gained skills in communicating with my young patients and then by lecturing. And I suppose I was then in an environment where I had the courage to challenge thinkings of paediatric surgeons and how they might manage ovaries which might not be how I thought they should be doing it, or challenging gynecologists about what they were doing. So there had to be an element of courage to be able to move. So who am I now? I can't claim to be an absolute guru. I'm still simply Sonia. So why am I lecturing you? I've had the honour of teaching and mentoring many wonderful young doctors at the Children's Hospital who've come and then gone back overseas to their countries, whether it be Malaysia or Canada or Hong Kong or China or Ireland. Yes, I've got some publications. I've never actually worked in a lab, but collaborate is a very, very, very important word, because I collaborate with the genetics and people. I collaborate with microbiome people. I collaborate with the respiratory physicians about asthma exacerbations with periods. So I couldn't agree more that collaboration is a really key word. And as I was listening to the previous lecture, I was thinking how much I've got away with doing my research by inspiring medical students to come and work with me, and then being able to make my research projects small enough for them to tackle. I always say I like doing jigsaw puzzles. So I don't mind piecing together my research with little pieces so that I get a big picture. I suppose, you know, I've been allowed to continue to do that at the time when my kids were little, and I really couldn't have coped with writing a massive grant application. But now that my kids have grown up, all of a sudden I do have the energy and enough publications behind me to be able to go for the bigger grant and succeed. But who am I? Well, I think most importantly, I've been involved in helping paediatric and adolescent gynecology flourish in Australia and Asia and the world. So for me, this tiny little specialty, which started for me as a tiny clinic once a fortnight, is now a clinic here at the hospital that sees 60, 70 patients a week. But more importantly, we now have paediatric gynae around Australia. But it's been built with the connections between gaining knowledge, having ideas, communicating, collaborating, and there has to be a seed of courage. So all of the overlap takes us into, I've mentioned pediatric surgery, I've mentioned genetics, I've mentioned microbiome, but inflammasomes, oncology, psychology overlapping with the quality of life of young women. So the limits of how we collaborate, those conversations in the corridor that you enthuse and encourage the networking, it can be achieved on a small scale so that it can grow into something bigger. So I have been lucky to have had the opportunity to gain some knowledge, and I was fortunate to be in a place where I've been exposed to new ideas, and I've taken my interest in teaching and communicating and courage to challenge and question. So what's happened already at the UKM is this tiny little subspecialty, which hardly existed and did not exist in Malaysia. There were 2 junior obs and gynae consultants who were looking for somewhere to go, who were inspired to look at this idea of paediatric and adolescent gynae. So UKM was able to give them the support. They were supported by their department to run a workshop, a 2-day workshop that they ran 13 years ago, and they emailed this unknown person who had a few publications, which was me, and that started the relationship between Melbourne and UKM. And so now, what have you got in Malaysia at UKM? Well, you've got a PAG department, which is leading more research, which has got members who've got a PhD and another with an MD. They're teaching paediatric and adolescent gynae in Asia and Oceania. They're inspiring others. They're integrating what they've learnt into the community. They've helped to establish peer support groups. They're in the schools doing education work. They uncovered that the whole area of families with children with disabilities had no supports and didn't realise that there were supports that could be available for menstrual issues. It might be tiny, but for these families, this is really significant. And again, you know, the work in that whole field of differences of sex development, the need to work with the community and the local imams for the sake of people affected by some of these conditions means that you already have demonstrated you're very capable of taking a seed and growing it. So what do I think you should be doing? I think you've already got the capacity to be doing so much. You've already demonstrated that you can support your students, because that's what you did with the people now who are, one of them sitting there in front of you. But continue to do that. Give them the space and the opportunity to explore new ideas. Have the confidence that they have the capacity to take those ideas and grow them. But don't forget, hold that belief that you are part of your community and your society, and that that's an integral part, and you need to belong and be part of that community. So this image that comes from the Lion King, as I said, rated one of the best movies by various different criteria. I'm not telling you to take the Hakuna Matata line of no worries. I'm not telling you to just sit back on your laurels. What I am telling you is what Mufasa says in The Lion King, and that is to believe in yourself. You've got the seeds there already, and there will come a day when others will have no choice but to believe with you. Look beyond what you see. So I think you've already got the seeds there. I think you've got history behind you. I think you've got the makings for what you need to do. You put your emphasis on knowledge, put your emphasis on being inspired by these new ideas, support those young researchers in the range of different faculties that you've got. Foster communications, because that collaboration between departments is such a source of inspiration, but then go beyond those boundaries and go across the borders. Yes, it is more challenging when we have to do it this way with Skyping and Zooming colleagues, but those opportunities to share just take us places. I'm very sorry to say, Professor Ahmed, but the microbiome work that Noor is undertaking at UKM is being done through collaborations with me through to La Trobe University, where there's a microbiome centre as well. But the collaboration and taking ideas across borders is all there already. Be courageous. So I think your motto already says what you need to be doing, and that's inspiring futures, nurturing possibilities. And I think you're on the way. I wouldn't focus on what number are you on a ranking system. I'd focus on what you should be doing. Thank you. Terima kasih.
Thank you, Sonia, for giving us a different perspective on how we should be looking at things. There's a few questions in the chat box, so I'll just read one of those. It's from Professor Zaleha. She's from my department. She says, ONG is particularly so difficult to secure a grant, especially for obstetric, because there's a lot of ethical entanglement, and there are not many investors, as their returns are probably not so great for the industry. So what is your advice on this matter?
Funding, as we've already mentioned, is always a challenge, and it's also, it can be a challenge in an area where people don't think it's so important. And so there is a whole ethos that has to be changed there in terms of, and it's about communication. It's about pointing out that these areas of maternal health are incredibly important for the future of the country, and that you need to be taking an active approach. As I mentioned, I'm often trying to do projects as little pieces and building it together. So I think trying to think of ways of breaking a bigger problem into smaller, or collaborating with people overseas so that, you know, you can only afford to do your bit, but in fact it's being replicated or it's being partnered with other teams who are doing the same, so that you get away with not trying to fund the whole thing yourself. You're funding a corner of a bigger project which you're leading. So no easy answers.
Sonia, can I just ask, university always emphasize on us, the academician, to get the grants, to get more grants and more grants. And as a junior academician, sometimes they want to apply, but most of them will be deemed as not eligible, as she or he might not have a title that goes with the grant. So what is your opinion on that? So how do the junior ones apply for the bigger grants?
I think that's probably an issue everywhere. You know, our big NH and MRC council tried to shuffle itself so that it stopped giving the grants to the people who'd had the grants before, who'd had the grants before, who'd had the grants before. And so that, you know, there was a tendency for the people who got grants for all the 50 plus year olds, 60 plus year olds, and that it was hard. And so although they redesigned the system, they haven't solved the problem. So, but I think that's where good mentoring also comes in, that you know, I've got somebody who's got a good idea. You know, unfortunately, I've got a few more publications and my name is known. If they talk to me and I'm mentoring and I'm helping them with the research project to ensure that it goes through, that you hitch on and you ensure that you've got some names that might help you, but you have to do the homework to make sure that I then don't pinch the ideas. But if I've got someone junior who's got a great idea, but they need the name, then as I said, I think that's where mentors come in to play support roles if needed. But systems also need to be conscious that they need to be trying to support the younger researchers.
Yeah, true. Sonia, as part of the university ranking, they look at the numbers of international students in that particular university. So how do we, as UKM, as a university in Asia, can promote our university to the international platform so that more will come in to join us? How do you foresee that we can do? Is there any strategies that we can use to get more of these people to come in?
I think it's an interesting question to ask at this very point of time, because, you know, I only need to reflect on what's happened at Melbourne University, where there are a substantial number of overseas students. And in fact, the whole university budgeting has been around having university students who are paying lots of the fees. And so they've all of a sudden run into a major problem because the international students haven't come, and because there's other reasons that, you know, in terms of international politics, that the numbers may shift. And so is that the most important criteria? Are you looking at a criteria that maybe doesn't matter as an endpoint of itself? If the endpoint is we do fantastic research, we have wonderful staff, we've got good mentors, if they are your goals, then I think your international students come to that, rather than saying, how can we advertise to get more international students? You know, that's, you put your money on that, I think you'd be better off putting your money on ensuring that you had research funds available, rather than posting someone to, I want to say China, to recruit Chinese students to come to your university. You know, that's what we've done in Australia, and now the whole thing's crumbling. So I'm not entirely sure that we should be aiming for that as an endpoint. Is that one of the criteria that maybe isn't the most valid. If you run a fantastic university with good research and good mentors and good teaching, the students will come.
There's someone in the audience that says that as a clinician, we still can do good research without large grant, and the research can still be impactful. However, there's a lot of emphasis on the grant, and that might not even yield high impact publication. So what is your opinion on this?
Well, as someone who has, as a clinician and a busy clinician, and I suppose I've combined that with having children along the way, that I really did not have the time or energy to be able to do the big grants. And yet I have managed to do lots of research along the way, and it's been very clinically driven. But some of those ideas and that I've started, or we've collaborated with people, I've then handed those ideas and seen them flourish with other people getting involved in them. And those people have led to getting funding. So I'm not sure that there's a simple solution here. Funding is incredibly difficult to access, and therefore my cheap's way of doing this has always been to look for students who are keen to work with me, and then I try and do the role of being a good mentor to help them grow. And, again, trying to get funding from alternative sources, but doing it piecemeal. It's taken me a long time to be at the point where I managed to line everything up in the right way to be able to get this more substantial grant in this. Really, who cares about period pain? Well, I'm sorry, it impacts on a large number of teenagers and impacts on their school performance. It is actually important, but so to end up being able to get a lot of funding in that has taken a long time to have got everything lined up to enable it to happen. So I'm not sure that I'm giving you, I'm saying, don't give up, keep trying.
Okay, there's another question that they said from the audience. Some of the intangible criteria of research excellence are not normally taken into consideration, including those in the main world ranking. So do you have any suggestion of making them into criteria to instill, and at the same time trying to maintain excellence of research culture?
I'm always interested in fixing and changing the world. But I have to, there are limits to what I can achieve. And so I do have doubts and concerns about the ranking systems not necessarily reflecting what you and I really want. So let's just stick to what we think's really important and say, well, that's great, but we're going to get there as the tortoise, and you can do it by high flying and ticking all the boxes, but we're going to do it sticking to knowledge and communication and mentoring and inspiring the future, rather than racing in a game that I'm not sure that I want to play that game anyway. So let's get on and do the things that are really valuable rather than playing a game. Now, I accept we have to play a bit of a game, but maybe some of those things are not worth going after. If we're going to spend lots of money advertising overseas for overseas international students, as I said, I think I'd prefer to see the money put back into research to ensure that when the students come, that we've got the funding to support them.
All right. Probably last question. Sonia, some of us are clinician, and some of us want to go into our subspecialty program and to develop the program. And of course, along the way, we see patients who we think that might have, I mean, there's the issues that we want to help, like Professor Imad said, and yourself, you said the patients are the inspiration. The question, I mean, you see the patient suffering and you want to have answers to that, because sometimes we do see that kind of situation and we want to help get the answers. But when you put the proposal for those who awarded the grant, that question might not be relevant or may have very little impact, but to you it's actually a big issue. So, and when you don't get the grant, some of these people get demotivated. And what is your advice for this clinician who are trying to go into research? I understand that passion is another thing, but sometimes the passion can be burnt out also. So how do we keep that light going?
I think what you're raising is the need for research in the less common areas, and or the rarer conditions, or as I said before, who's interested in period pain. And yet it's incredibly common. And so if I think about how did funding related to period pain come into place? Well, it came into place because a group of women made a lot of fuss and organised themselves to talk to the parliamentarians, and then some of the parliamentarians actually said, oh yes, we get pain too. And so they turned it into a political issue. So and I can think of other topics where it's also been helped by, I mean, you've got the good example of your wonderful young woman who's born without a uterus and vagina, and she's been on the media, and therefore, if you were trying to do more research into MRKH, the condition where you're born without a uterus, that in fact she's been valuable to actually make the point to the public that this is really important. So sometimes we have to be quite savvy in terms of our communication skills, that maybe we need some help from outside so that it's actually got a presence. You think about what's been done in breast cancer has been driven, by a whole vocal movement about breast cancer and the push, and yet there are lots of other cancers. Bowel cancer is actually more common across the community. So we can actually get distorted because a topic gets into the headlines. So coming back to those less common conditions, in Australia there is a rare diseases group that now is pushing to say we should be acknowledging rare diseases and working with them. And in fact, there's now research funding. So I'm sure whoever was involved in that originally will, be having a sigh of relief, and it might well have taken them 10 years to get specific research funding now available for rare diseases.
Last question, Sonia. What are the qualities of good mentor in your opinion? Because we have difficulty trying to find mentors. So what in your opinion, what is it that we should be looking out for?
I must say, I feel inspired by the younger people around me. So I suppose, and the people around me who consider me their mentor, I've listened to them, but I've been inspired by them, and I want to encourage them. So I'm not sure what I can say. I'm not sure. And I suppose, why am I struggling? Because if I think about who did I have as a mentor, because that would be the nice thing, if I could describe to you my mentor. But in fact, the only person who was really a mentor for me was a long time ago, and I didn't have anyone to support me through paediatric and adolescent gynae work. But the person who had been a mentor to me had confidence that I, listened to me and inspired me to have confidence in myself and to take chances and go forward. So somebody who can do that for others is, I think, what you're looking for.
Right. Thank you, Sonia. I think, thank you very much. You've given us a different perspective of the whole thing. I mean, we are so focused on getting into making ourselves known and getting the ranking there. So I think we're doing okay. We'll be the tortoise. We'll get there sooner or later. With that, I pass the mic back to Prof. Tan.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Azura. May I ask one question, Prof. Sonia? Do you think the current ranking system of university is fair to everyone?
Well, I think the fact that it's not consistent and that you can get different results says that there's whatever the criteria are questionable. And I'm not entirely sure that we need to be running in that race. So it's like there's a race over there. Do we really need to be in that race? Because what we need to be doing is doing what we know we should be doing, which is taking ideas, growing, collaborating, working on research that's going to offer value to our community. Are they measuring that well or not? But I don't care. Let's just stick to doing this really well, and let's just end up being a place where people want to go to study because they know they've got a great team of people who inspire and are doing some great research. I'm not sure that I necessarily want to go to the university that is ranked 1st or 10th, who's got lots of sports scholarship students there. That yes, no, or is ranked highly because it gets millions of dollars from somebody who wants to have their kids go to that university. That's not the university you want to go to. So the university that you want to go to is the university. When you think about your kids, where do you want your kids to go? Where they're going to have the opportunity to grow and have ideas and be given the network collaborative skills to go forth in their life and contribute in a positive way to the community. I'm not sure that I'm a believer in the details of that race that's happening over there.
Okay, thank you very much, Prof. Sonia. So thank you so much, Prof. Sonia and Prof. Azura, for these very interesting sessions. I think the take-home message for me for these sessions is that we need to be believe in yourself and have courage. Okay, so I would like to again thank our international distinguished professor for giving this excellent webinar. I believe everybody has benefited from this particular webinar. And I would like to also thank those who have attended this webinar and have a nice Friday evening. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.